Burger Time World Tour is touted not as a remake but a retro evolution of the arcade classic, developed by Monkey Paw Studios and published by Konami. Hello, I'm Derek Alexander reviewing for RetroWareTV.com. World Tour for the Xbox 360 and PlayStation 3 features fast-paced action platforming with many expansions on the original formula for the retro audience, super flashy and colorful graphics for the modern audience, a single-player campaign of impressive length, and a surprisingly fun multiplayer mode. Unfortunately, its smooth and flashy graphics undermine a lot of the enjoyment due to sensory overload and a camera too far pulled back. I enjoyed the multiplayer, but my friend complained that the game was headache-inducing and in split-screen very difficult to follow. These flaws are compounded by controls that are often floaty and questionable hit detection. It amounts to an experience that has a lot of really good ideas, but is too flawed to fully recommend. Burger Time World Tour developers Monkey Paw Studios have been adamant to state that this is, quote, not a revamp or remake. Burger Time World Tour is the first foray in what they are calling retro evolution, and this is a great way to approach the game. Like the arcade original, you still must dodge nefarious foods like sausages, eggs, and pickles, and make giant burgers by pushing each layer on top of each other like a slinky on a staircase. And if you trap an enemy on a piece with some pepper, you'll create a longer domino effect. Evading the enemies is easier thanks to your character's brisk run and smooth jump. And once you get the hang of things, you'll be tearing through levels, jumping ladders, hopping enemies, which is pretty fun thanks to a complete absence of slowdown. And the levels are huge, chock full of other hazards like brittle wooden platforms, shifting platforms, and slides that produce exploding barrels. There's so much more here to worry about than just avoiding sausages and making burgers. But don't worry, you have some extra power-ups to help you out, like a powerful rocket, screen-clearing hot sauce, and a spatula that gives you a deadly Crash Bandicoot-like spin. And as an added bonus, you can play as your avatar. Right on. World Tour is definitely more than a simple remake, and Monkey Paw has successfully recreated Burger Time for a modern audience. Woo! I'm the king of burgers! But some restraint was needed for the game's aesthetic. Environments are bright, colorful, and very flashy, but suffer from sensory overload. Though this is something you get used to, for the first few hours I had to take frequent breaks to avoid headaches, the boss battles especially. The game looks beautiful on my widescreen LCD TV, but it's too busy. There's just too much going on here. Making things worse is a camera perspective pulled very far back, making your character, the enemies, and hazards often difficult to follow when things get really crazy in the later levels. The game seems to encourage you to move quickly, and again, jumping on and off ladders and evading enemies and dodging traps and hazards is a lot of fun. But because the camera placement makes it difficult to tell exactly where you and the enemies are, hit detection becomes harder to gauge than it ought to be. Other subtle issues that stem from this are sometimes I can't tell if my pepper has connected with an enemy. I often realized that too late the platform I was standing on was a brittle wooden platform or a shifting one. Though I eventually got used to this. I was constantly hitting checkpoints without ever noticing they were there in the first place. And not to mention that the controls are a bit floaty and take a lot to get used to. You run and jump really fast and it's easy to sometimes get ahead of yourself. It all adds up to a fast-moving game that actually often punishes you for moving too quickly. I was shocked when I found out this game had a walking animation. For the purposes of this review, I stuck with the single player much longer than I normally would have, and after a while I started to get used to some of these issues, but by then the single player had become rather boring. There are 4 worlds, each with 9 levels and a boss fight, and by the time I reached the final world, I had had my fill of the single player. Not to mention every boss fight was a damn frustrating chore. So yes, in all fairness, I have not finished the single player campaign, but the fact that I just couldn't be bothered to do so should count for something. The high point of World Tour is definitely its multiplayer. Small note, I wasn't able to capture multiplayer footage for this review, but there's 2 things that make the multiplayer work. 1, rounds are time-based, so you have unlimited lives. But the longer you're out, the more time your buddies have to themselves. And the other great thing is matches are decided by total points, not total burgers. So if your friend is being an asshole and vulturing all your burgers, it doesn't necessarily mean they're gonna win. One match my friend did just that, even though by the end we tied for total burgers made. I won by a large margin because I was doing all the work, racking up points. There are 10 burger levels and 5 rocket race levels, which are fun linear or maze-like levels. After the underwhelming single player, this multiplayer was a pleasant surprise. Who would have thought Burger Time would make a great competitive multiplayer game? If I play Burger Time World Tour again, it'll be the multiplayer mode. Unfortunately, we had to wrap up after about a half hour of play because my friend said his eyes were straining due to the aforementioned busy graphics and the split screen. Even though at that point my eyes had finally adjusted through a couple hours of single player, I too was starting to feel that strain again. If it makes any difference, his TV is bigger and nicer than mine. I wanted to try the game online, but nobody was playing, so at the time of this writing, I can't comment on network multiplayer. There are a lot of great ideas in Burger Time World Tour, but there are just too many faults for me to give it a recommendation. The single player has its moments, but it's often listless when it isn't difficult for the wrong reasons. And though I thoroughly enjoyed that multiplayer, that too was disrupted by its overly flashy and busy aesthetic, coupled with a bad perspective and floaty controls. This game is simply too busy and fast-moving for its own good. If you're a hardcore Burger Time enthusiast, your money is better spent tracking down Burger Time Deluxe for the original Game Boy. But if you or your gaming buddies are looking for a quick multiplayer experience that's totally unique, consider Burger Time World Tour. Just be prepared to take breaks every couple games. This has been Derek Alexander reviewing for RetroWareTV.com.